Good morning. I'm Mark from the British Ports Association, and thankfully I'm not covered by Purdue or pre-election periods, so I can say just about whatever I like, which is how I like it. I'm going to give a very brief overview of the sector, the port sector, and the policy framework that we operate within. Talk very briefly about some of the challenges and barriers we have around decarbonisation. Again, very briefly on what the sector is doing broadly, although that can be quite difficult because it's so broad. And then I'll actually get to the actual title of the presentation about what we want from the next government, whoever that might be tomorrow, although it looks increasingly certain from what I can see. Oh yeah, thank you. So the British Ports Association, we are a trade association. We're not ABP, we're not Associated British Ports, the port operator. We are a trade association representing over 115 port and terminal members now. Our members own and operate over 350 ports and terminals all across the UK. And we are broadly, we operate a network of ports and bring them together to collaborate on things. But we're also the voice of the industry to government. And for anyone who tunes out in the next 20 minutes, broadly what I'm going to say is we're getting on with it, doing quite well, I think, but there are certain things we need from government to overcome particular barriers to decarbonisation. For those not familiar with the sector, the port sector, there are a lot of them. No one knows quite how many because there isn't really a sort of an agreed definition of what a port is. Our friends at the MCA tell us that there are 1,700 ports, but that covers marinas, jetties, and all sorts of things, just about anything that something that floats can arrive at. There are 452 harbour authorities, but broadly what most people would think of as a commercial port. There's around 125 cargo handling ports all across the UK, all focused on different things, all different sizes, all types of different ownership models, so very different, which can have implications for policy and how we implement change in the sector. Just a brief snapshot of the sector. It's broadly doing well, handled 458 million tonnes of cargo for the last year that we have data for. We've got a good story to tell on employment and skills. Very productive, highly productive industry spread all across the UK, so we're very good at levelling up, as this government calls it, or regeneration, as a previous government referred to it. And the success of our sector, we very much always make the point to government that is not an accident, it's not a coincidence, it's very much because of the policy framework that has allowed this sector to thrive in the way it has over the last 30 years or so. We are broadly, I almost forgot to mention that the 95%, that is almost obligatory for every presentation about maritime. So ports handle 95% of the UK's trade in goods. A lot of that, about 2/3, is coming in. We're very much an import-driven economy. We need ports and shipping to deliver the food, half the food we eat, and a lot of the energy that we use as well. So very important. Briefly on the sort of overarching policy snapshot, since sort of the 90s, there has been a broad consensus from successive governments and the industry that port sector is market-led and commercially operated. There is a mixed model of ownership, so you have broadly three broad models: privately owned ports like the one at ABP at Southampton or Felixstowe. You have trust ports like Dover or the Port of London, and municipal ports like Portsmouth or Sunderland or Orkney. It's a mixed model. It works well. It is also very much a fragmented ecosystem when it comes to ports, terminals, and the various other entities that operate within them. That is very much a feature, not a bug, of the current policy. It works well. There are a bit of a cliched saying: you've been to one port, you've been to one port because you go somewhere else, and it's very different in the way it's set up, what they handle, the size of it, whether on the river or the sea, all sorts of different things. So that works for handling freight and delivering good levels of investment every year. We get about £600 million of mostly private funding into port infrastructure every year. This is designed to be a very confusing slide. It's something we share with our members in government. We thought, how can we best present the quite complex patchwork quilt of regulation and legislation that covers our sector, and someone had the idea to design it as a tube map. So we've tried to cover off all of the bits of regulation that cover our sector and then give them a sort of red, amber, green rating. It is actually due to be updated tomorrow or the day after, so I'm afraid you're stuck with the version from March last year. But what it broadly shows is that there is quite a lot that ports have to deal with. A lot of our members are quite small businesses or small, medium-sized entities, and they have to cover quite a lot of stuff across a broad range of areas. But it also shows that most of the regulation, I'm basically a lobbyist, right? I spend a lot of time talking to government and telling them what's problematic for our members. So this was also designed to show that actually a lot of it works okay. And just because I spend a lot of time moaning to politicians and to officials, actually there is a bunch of regulation that actually works and delivers well for our industry. So on the Clean Maritime Policy specifically, sector, people here probably fairly aware, we're very much waiting for the Clean Maritime Plan, which we have been waiting for some months, a refreshed Clean Maritime Plan, I should say. We're expecting that from the Department for Transport. Hopefully it will be forthcoming quite soon after the election. One of the things I'd say about, I mentioned there's been a long consensus about how the sector operates. Most of the issues within the sector, free ports and one or two other things aside, are fairly non-controversial politically, and we would hope that an incoming Labour government, if that seems to be where we're going, wouldn't rip everything up and start again when it comes to these bits of work. So forthcoming Clean Maritime Plan, looking forward to seeing what's in that. And there's also within that is the Net Zero Ports piece of work, which will look at, it's a call for evidence, which we're expecting again pretty soon after the election, as we were told it was imminent beforehand. Just briefly, we are still very close to our friends in Europe. We're still part of the European Seaports Organisation. Many of our member ports still take part in their surveys and bits of research. So again, another very dense slide, but what it essentially shows is the pink boxes at the top is climate change, and these are the top environmental priorities for ports all across Europe, year on year, going back all the way to 1996. And it was only in 2022 that climate change beat air quality to the top spot. And just because it's hard to read, there are the top 10 for last year for European ports, climate change at the top. I would say probably climate change for us is about 20 different issues, if I'm honest. But there it is above air quality, which is still also very, very high, and in some cases very related. So on to some of the challenges that we're facing at the moment, decarbonising our operations. First of all, probably the most obvious is around some of the cost and technical challenges. Ports, again, they're all very different, but mostly they operate lots of heavy machinery, whether it's on land or have marine assets or both. And for different bits of kit, the market is developing at different rates. So still some way off on things like zero-emission pilot vessels or tugs, for example, but other bits of kit, cargo handling, things like smaller forklifts, much more advanced and getting there. Energy capacity, probably the biggest thing on our agenda at the moment for our association and others. And I think it's the same for some other industries as well. We've done some work on this, which I'll touch on a little bit later, but most ports are essentially in England and Wales are at their power ceiling already, and whatever happens, there's a lot of uncertainty, but electrification is going to play a big part in the decarbonisation of ports and in some cases for shipping as well. So capex is an issue for new energy connections, but also the actual unit price of electricity, standing charges, as well as the actual process of getting new connections, all needs to change very quickly. I did see, was interested that the Labour Party's manifesto said National Grid was the biggest barrier to business decarbonisation. I think that's something most of our members would agree with, whether it's grid or the DNOs. Certainly getting access to power is challenging, and it's something that is near universal with our members. There are some reforms going on at the moment, but I think even the current government admits things are going to get worse on energy before it gets better, which is unfortunate given the timescales we're looking at. And then just finally on some of the different challenges and barriers, I mentioned earlier the sort of highly fragmented nature of the sector, and that works very well for investment and this sort of and competing for business. But when it comes to big challenges like decarbonisation, it can be tricky. There's lots of what I think the government often refers to as split incentives. So things like shore power, for example, would require large upfront investment from ports, but the benefits, the emissions benefits, tend to accrue to shipping. And even there, it might be that the ship owner has to invest in shore power on their asset, but it might be the operator that gets the benefit from that. So it is quite tricky. It's not going to change that sort of fragmented ecosystem that we have, so we have to work with it, and I think policy has to be designed around that. Very quickly on what ports are doing, it's quite a lot, I'm pleased to say. So just on what we're doing as the BPA and other associations, we've just launched a net zero, I have to get this right, net zero maturity assessment. We changed the name, something much longer and harder to say at the last minute. So this will be, we're encouraging our members to take part in this exercise where they can essentially anonymously benchmark their activities, their decarbonisation efforts against each other. So it's not comparing the emissions of Port A versus Port B. It's very much you send in, you fill out the form essentially. It's a bit underselling it. It's a bit more than that. You give us the data, and then we'll tell you where you're comparing on a whole bunch of different metrics with other ports, other similar ports and operators. So we're hoping that will help ports understand where they're doing well and perhaps where they need to speed up on their journey. Also developing other tools and guidance as you would expect from industry associations, and doing some research on that energy demand to help grid, help the energy network operators, councils and government understand a bit better that huge challenge. Just very quickly, some of the work we've done on port energy usage, I won't dwell on it for too long. We're currently asking all ports to give us their estimates and forecasts for their likely future energy demand. We've worked with National Grid to develop a tool to help ports do that. So there's obviously a lot of uncertainty around that, but to give us a bit of a flavour and to give government a bit of a flavour of what might be coming down the track. And as you would expect, there's huge variation in that. So we've got at the moment somewhere between, most ports will need between 2 and 30 times the amount of power they currently have to meet their future needs. So, and a lot of them are towards the top end of that rather than the bottom, unfortunately. So huge amounts of investment or some other solutions going to be needed to meet that coming demand. Other things we're doing, or I think the other things the industry are doing, I think the Green Corridors work that was launched at COP26 is plodding ahead, and there's some really exciting work going on there. I think it's been really good at bringing lots of different stakeholders together to actually have important conversations for the first time, and from the sounds of it, there are some of those projects are quite far advanced, so we're really looking forward to what comes out of the both the domestic and the international green corridors work. UK Shore is the, let me get this right, the UK Shipping Office for Reducing Emissions at the Department for Transport, and their Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition. That was 206 million pounds launched by DFT a few years ago, and I think the first time we've really seen significant levels of investment from government in maritime decarbonisation. That's almost at an end. We're very keen to see more of it from the next government, because I think it's been really successful at driving collaboration and engagement between ports, shipping, and all the other people that we're going to need to help sort these challenges. So very keen to see a new round of that with some improvements on how it's delivered. Just very quickly on what some of the things that ports are doing at the moment. Investing in generation, big one for lots of ports. Again, you can never make too much of a generalisation with our industry, but a lot of ports will have lots of roof space, lots of space for turbines on land and things like that. So lots of that going on. Most ports, if you sort of stand still too long, you're going to get a solar panel put on your head and start generating power for the port. So we're seeing loads of that happening. We're seeing, I think, future of ports is very much as energy hubs, and generation is going to be a big part of that. There's also lots of interesting novel generations going on from things like fences that generate power when the wind blows through them and things like that. More broadly, what are ports doing? One of the things we're waiting for or expecting to see in the refreshed Clean Maritime Plan is targets for the industry. What we're saying to government is that most of the ports industry already have targets, most aiming around 2040 or earlier. So certainly most major ports in the UK already have pretty significant plans in place for the Scope 1 and 2 emissions. Also, most are fairly advanced in their journey in terms of modelling and knowing what the emissions are and where they're coming from. It's obviously one of the first things you need to do in order to tackle them. And some are even thinking about introducing discounts to shipping to encourage them to move to greener options. On the marine side of their operations, as I said, sort of mentioned earlier, the pilot vessels and some of those options are still a little way off in terms of the market delivering zero emission solutions. We're seeing lots of more efficient and hybrid options coming through. Some ports starting to use drop-in fuels, zero emission fuels in their marine assets, although there are some policy issues with that, and there is a significant premium on that, so you have to be prepared to take the costs. On the land side, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's a bit more straightforward in that the plant and equipment, there are drop-in options. For some bits and pieces, electrification might be an option, whether it's batteries or plugging in. So starting to see lots more investment in hybrid and electric cranes and other cargo handling equipment. Hydrogen and other fuels are also an option in some UK and European ports for cargo handling equipment. What thing to remember on this is most of the cargo handling equipment is at the heavier end of things, so it is harder to decarbonise than a sort of small forklift that you might have at a warehouse, for example. And also, something we're also keen to say is that the UK we're not big in the global market when it comes to buying this sort of equipment. So the market is not reacting to what UK ports are doing, it's reacting to what ports are doing globally, although there is a lot going on in Europe, which is good news for us. And then where most of the emissions are, sort of 95+% of emissions in a port are not from the actual port operations, they're from ships and surface transport. Although the emissions at berth, we would say, are a relatively small amount of a vessel's overall emissions. There's a lot more uncertainty in this respect. Some ports starting to explore shore power, although there is still remains some significant barriers around that, and we have some views on what government needs to do in that area. And decarbonising tenants and other things like that. This is what I mentioned earlier, some split incentives, and it can be difficult in that if you have a tenant, a warehouse operator or a logistics operator, or even someone operating a terminal on a lease, or a long-term lease, you essentially have very little control over what they do. So it does require a lot of partnership and collaboration to help your tenants, if you have them, start to reduce their emissions. I'm almost contractually obliged to mention coastal shipping at any opportunity. One of the things I have to say is that there is an opportunity right now to reduce emissions from transport by moving more freight by sea or by water. It is by far the most efficient way to move freight, given the scale involved. So we have, as I said earlier, we have a large number of ports, pretty good road network and rail network. We should be using this more to reduce emissions right now, taking more trucks off of our road and delivering freight closer to where it needs to be by sea. So actually getting to what I came here to talk about, what do we need from the next government? What are we asking for? We've published our sort of manifesto and our programme for the next government, and we're obviously talking to lots of politicians on a sort of on a regular basis. Essentially, what we need is good, solid policy, a fresh look at funding, and becoming more and more important, proper capacity in government, which is something we don't talk about as much, but is really important. On the policy side of things, obviously we're waiting, very keen to see the Clean Maritime Plan, and for us the Net Zero Ports piece of work to understand government thinking. We're also waiting on consultation on the implementation of the emissions trading scheme and bringing maritime within that. We're very interested in what the government's thinking about alternative fuels policy, whether they'll follow the EU and their route, or if they're thinking something different. So yeah, it's a fairly obvious one. We need clear frameworks, and something we say to government very often is they need to be technology neutral. So on going back to shore power, for example, we don't want the government putting in a shore power mandate. We should be saying we see very much shore power as a means and not an end in itself. So don't regulate the technology. Don't tell us what technology or fuels we need to use. Tell us where we need to get to, and then help us get there. Broader ports policy, leave it alone. It's fine. It works very well. What we do need is some planning and reforms to help ports develop and deliver better. And reverse the DfT's opposition to biofuels for maritime. That is not technology neutral. They should instead set out the framework for that, rather than tell maritime that it shouldn't be using biofuels. Funding, we're not traditionally a sector that asks for funding. We in fact usually quite suspicious of it. Don't see a huge amount of public investment in ports in the UK. So it's quite new for us, and there is a bit of worry. You know, we don't like to see it's a very well-functioning, mature market. When if government steps in with millions or billions of pounds, that can have unintended impacts. Having said that, there is a clear need for funding in certain areas, so we do need a second UK shore. We probably do need some funding specifically for emissions at berth and things like that, and they do need to be longer term and delivered better. And then finally, just a note on government capacity, we need regulators that are confident, that are intelligent and know the sector well, that aren't afraid to take risks and truly support the sector, because we do need them to enable us on this journey and not stand in our way. And I'm happy to talk about why that's on there if anyone's interested. So thank you. I hope I haven't run over too much, but that's us.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark.